We're following a major decision from the Supreme Court that could shape the future of healthcare for transgender youth across the country. The court, in a 6-3 decision, left in place a Tennessee law that bans transgender minors from receiving gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers and hormone therapy. More than 20 states have enacted laws banning such care for trans minors. Advocates are framing this ruling as a devastating loss, including the mom of one transgender youth whose case was at the center of this legal battle. In a New York Times op-ed released after the decision, she wrote, "Our hearts are broken." Joining me now to help us understand what this ruling means and what could come next is Alyse Adamson, a former federal prosecutor. Alyse, so sometimes these rulings can be narrow. Can you help us understand what the judges decided to do? Because Chief Justice Robert wrote for the majority that the case carries a lot of weight, but also we leave questions regarding the policy to the people, to elected representatives. Meanwhile, you had Justice Sotomayor writing, by retreating from meaningful judicial review where it matters most, the court abandons transgender children and their families to political whims. Help us explain those two different views.
Sure, that's right, Audie. So essentially what the conservative majority did here was they found that the law, that Tennessee law, did not single anybody out based on identity or here transgender status. They said that this was not a sex discrimination case because remember, this challenge to the law was brought as an equal protection challenge to the 14th Amendment. They said this was discriminatory based on gender identity or sexual identity, that being transgender.
That's what the plaintiffs
were arguing. The Supreme Court said, no, this is a neutral law that applies to everybody equally, both girls and boys, and that the class is age. This law applies to minors. A medical condition, that being gender dysphoria, and it has to do with their medical treatment. So that is the way the majority chose to treat this law. And because of that, because they said it was not a sex discrimination case, they were able to apply the most deferential standard of judicial review, that being the rational basis test. So long as a state has a legitimate reason for passing a law, unless it is blatantly discriminatory, they're going to uphold it as constitutional.
But can I come back to this thing you said? Have they made a ruling in such a way that other cases where transgender plaintiffs come forward and say, we're a protected class under the law because of gender, that's like off the table?
Well, Audie, this was a very narrow ruling. I know transgender advocates are framing this, as you said in your opening, as a devastating loss, but this case was really cabined upon medical treatment. So I think in the future, the immediate impact is this ban is going to go into effect in Tennessee. There's over 20 states that have similar laws that relate to this gender-affirming care. I think when it comes to other transgender issues and potential infringement on their rights, that being bathroom bans, transgender athletes, it's going to be a different argument because this argument was so narrow. So the court was essentially able to sidestep this by saying, no, this is a medical issue. This really pertains to medical care. I also just want to respond to something you said about public policy. What the Supreme Court majority essentially said was this is a state's issue. And if you do not like this law, go to the ballot box and elect other legislators. That's what rational basis is, essentially. It's very deferential to the states. The dissent, Judge Sotomayor, was saying, what are you talking about, essentially? This is gender-affirming care. It flies in the face of logic. How could this not be sex discrimination? This is exactly the type of issue that the Supreme Court should take up.
As you said, because it's a somewhat narrow ruling, we may see this issue come up again in some of these other transgender legislation. Alyse Adamson's a former federal prosecutor and host of the At-lyse You Heard It podcast. Thank you for being here, as always.
Thanks, Audie.